Hello and welcome back to my channel. Now in this video, I would like to share with you the RF lenses that I own and the reason why. Now this is the RF 15 to 35 f2.8. Now this is the lens that is extremely good for like landscapes, it's good for architectural interiors, it's good for a kind of street and urban style photography. An extremely versatile lens, and I've had it for about 3 years now. This is the lens I use to get those super wide shots of the stadiums when I go to sports games. It's also the one that is used for those extreme close-ups after the match, when players sort of interact with fans to sign autographs and that type of thing. So this is an extremely useful lens to take with you. This is also a lens that I like to travel with quite a lot. For a 2.8 constant aperture lens, this lens is extremely portable and lightweight, so really there's no reason for that not to be in your bag every time you travel. As I said, it's great for landscapes. It's also really good for time-lapse photography, as it's extremely sharp around sort of f5.6. It's good for that kind of interior architectural photography. It's good for that kind of general street and kind of urban photography. It's also good for video because at 35mm, it's generally considered a fairly standard focal range. So for video, it's pretty good. However, at 15mm, there is this kind of weird kind of wobble that you have to bear in mind. And I think a lot of that is down to the image stabilizer. So it's quite rare for a lens this wide to have image stabilization built in. Quite unusual to have that, but as a result, at the wider end, 15mm, you do kind of get this kind of weird little wobble going on, and I think Canon are trying to fix it with like firmware updates and stuff like that, but it's just something to bear in mind when you shoot video with this. Doesn't affect the photos in any way, so it really is only video. So it's an RF lens, as I mentioned, so it's purely designed for the RF mount and also for the full frame cameras. It's possible that you might be able to use these on the crop sensors, the APS-Cs, but it's designed for full frame and the RF mount. It's an extremely sharp lens at 5.6 to f8, but you can use this wide open f2.8 and you're still getting extremely sharp imagery, extremely good quality, even wide open, and the depth of field is obviously incredible. So fantastic lens. The 15mm is usually wide enough for most situations, and the 35mm is good focal distance for sort of general photography, really. I mean, and also for video. So it's 15 to 35 is a really good, useful, versatile focal range. It's expensive, but I think you have to expect that now with the RF series of lenses. It's not a cheap lens. Is it worth the money? I mean, for what you're getting, I think it's probably worth the money, yeah. Unfortunately, with these RF L series lenses, they're not going to be cheap, unfortunately, and it's just something you're going to have to expect. If you're moving to the R series or the RF mount, you're going to have to really put your hand in your pocket and make a really serious investment. So next up, we have the 28 to 70 f2. And as you can see, this lens is extremely big and it is reasonably heavy, but it's also possibly one of the best lenses ever made by Canon. It was released fairly early in the evolution of the kind of RF mount. So it was released around September 2018. So it's been around for quite a while. I bought this probably about 3 years ago now. Now I've not used it as much as some of the other lenses here, but when I do use it, it produces some pretty amazing results, I have to say. The reason why I don't use it as much is purely because I'm just not able to travel as easy with this lens as some of the other lenses, and you know that would be the reason why I just haven't used it as much. But when travel isn't an issue, this lens is in the bag. There's been situations where I felt like I needed to be wider than 28mm focal range. That can be a little bit limiting, 28 as opposed to say 24 or even the 15 on the 15 to 35 here. But you do have the option of getting the 24 to 70, which is an f2.8. This is 28 to 70, but it's f2. But what does f2 get you over 2.8? Well, it's a full stop of light. You're compromising focal length with light gathering capability. So really, that's the compromise you have to make in photography. But this lens just delivers really top quality imagery. To have f2 constant aperture, 28 to 70 focal range is a bit of a luxury, to be honest. The depth of field in this lens creates that kind of surreal, magical imagery that only extremely wide apertures can achieve. The 70mm focal range at f2 delivers really amazing results, and it kind of negates the need to have that sort of 35 and 50mm prime lenses. Just a bit of a shame it doesn't go all the way to 85, then you kind of got all those focal ranges covered, but I think that would have made it even bigger than what it is, and obviously a lot heavier and a lot more expensive. So it's probably about right for what it is now, with 28 to 70. I don't think they could have pushed it any further. Also, there's no optical image stabilizer built into this lens, which is a bit of a shame, but again, it probably would have made the lens so much larger and heavier, and again, a lot more expensive. So it's probably about right. Sort of the compromise you have to make between this and the 24 to 70 is that it doesn't have the stabilization system built in. You kind of have to bear that in mind when investing in this, because it's a pretty serious investment. Unfortunately, you can't have everything, but I think I'm being a little bit kind of fussy here, because this really is an incredible lens for most types of photography, for time lapse and also for video. Next, we have the 70 to 200 f2.8. You can't really seriously call yourself a photographer if you don't have a 70 to 200 f2.8 lens. I think pretty much every photographer out there has one of these in their bag, whether it's one of the new ones or one of the old ones or a third-party lens. 70 to 200 has to be part of your kit. So Canon released their updated version. It would have been sort of back end of 2019, I think this was released. So it's been around for quite a while. I've had this for at least 4 years now. And it was a slightly controversial at the time, because they decided to do away with that kind of internal zoom, so it's now an external zoom lens. But as a result, as you can see, that if I take the lens hood off, this lens is incredibly small and compact and much lighter than the older EF versions. So I think what Canon have done here is actually quite amazing. They've made a lens that's an improvement on the EF version, that's sharper, more compact and lighter, and it's easier to travel with. So all in all, it's a bit of a winner. As I touched on, it's great for travel, but on the downside is that because it's not internal zoom, there is that chance of dust and moisture getting into the lens barrel. And I have to say, I've travelled far and wide with this lens, pretty much always in my bag, and so far I have not experienced any major issues with dust and moisture getting inside the lens. It's weather sealed pretty well, and I've had this for about 4 years now, and it's travelled with me all over the world. So yeah, so far so good. It's probably the most versatile lens out there. The 70mm range is wide enough for most subjects, and 200mm is obviously amazing for sports, wildlife, action photography. The 70mm end is obviously good for portraits, it's good for street photography, it's good for, it's great for video. It's actually a really good lens for video because the image stabilization system built in. So it's a really good versatile lens, good for a lot of things. Extremely good for sports and wildlife because of that f2.8 aperture. So when you have extreme low light situations, this is the lens that you kind of go to because of that f2.8 and the 200mm focal distance. It's really a lens that you can't really live without. So it's the lens I pretty much always take with me when I go traveling because of its overall versatility. Now you have noticed that it's not white. Well, that's because I got this kind of acrylic coating over it. I think I did like one trip with this, and it was already getting kind of chipped and marked. So I decided to put this kind of acrylic coating over the top of it. And it seems to have helped to kind of preserve the lens. I mean, these lenses kind of hold their value anyway, but I just wanted something to kind of protect it because I was traveling quite a lot with it, and it's going to be banging around in the bag and you're taking it onto aircrafts and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so that's the reason why it looks a little bit different. But you don't have to do that. Obviously, it's just a personal choice of mine to have done that to help kind of protect the lens, and it seems to be working so far. So it's extremely sharp lens, 5.6 to f8, and obviously there's no reason not to use it wide open as well. You're still getting really fantastic results at wide open f2.8. So all in all, I think Canon have done a really amazing job with their RF 70 to 200. So we're getting through pretty quickly. Now we've got the next one, which is the RF 100 to 500. Now if I take the lens hood off and I attach it to the lens, and then I extend it, you can see the true kind of length of the lens. Now it compacts down pretty nicely if I just take the lens hood off, and so actually a very, very nice lens to travel with, and it's not overly heavy either. If I compare it to the other lenses here, it's obviously going to be a bit heavier, but it's not significantly heavier, and that's the great thing about it. And you can take obviously the lens collar off as well. You can take that off, and it does save a little bit of weight there, but for the most part this lens has been exceptional. This is the lens I probably wouldn't refer to as being a pro lens, despite it being an L series Canon lens. And this is because of the aperture. You're going from f4.5 to 7.1. However, this does produce some really, really fantastic results. In the 3 years that I've been using this lens, this has been with me on many, many occasions. And I can tell you now, it's extremely sharp, and the autofocus is unbelievably quick. There's been occasions where I've used this for sports photography. The 100 to 500 focal range is extremely useful. Having that 100mm at the short end, it kind of negates the need for that second camera body and lens. So it does make shooting a little bit easier. And also it reduces the amount of gear that you need to carry with you. When you can kind of do it with sort of one lens, I mean, it makes it pretty useful. But unfortunately, the aperture going to 7.1 at the 500mm range, it actually starts to kick in around about 460mm. But you're still going to be at f6.3. It does unfortunately count against it. But if you're shooting in broad daylight, absolutely no issues at all with using that. If you've got plenty of light, absolutely no problem whatsoever with using the RF 100 to 500. It's a focal range that kind of covers most of the field, so 100 to 500, and the 100mm range, it's normally wide enough for subjects that start to sort of run towards you. So you kind of got it covered. However, for really extreme situations such as low light photography, this lens is going to struggle a little bit, which is the reason why I can't really recommend it as a professional choice, even though it's an L series lens. And at over $2,500 US, it's not cheap either. It's a big investment for a lot of people. It's a significant amount of money to spend on the lens. The f7.1 aperture is a bit of a handicap, and you're going to have to be shooting at extremely high ISO values, which obviously is going to make some of your imagery look a little bit grainy, and you're going to lose a lot of detail. So it's worth bearing in mind. This is obviously going to be for sports, action, wildlife, that type of photography where you're going to need extremely fast shutter speeds. To compensate that, you have to ramp up the ISO, because the aperture at 500mm, you're already going to be at f7.1. So you have no choice really but to increase the ISO values. However, for everything else, this lens is pretty magical. If you've got enough light, it's just a really, really fantastic, fun lens to work with. Like I mentioned, it's not like extremely heavy either. I mean, I can walk around all day with this. For me, it's not a problem. Now, I've had this for about 3 years now. I've used it for a number of different subjects, from portraits, landscapes, even for video, as well as sports and wildlife and stuff like that. So yeah, a good lens for video. I mean, you've got the image stabilization built in as well. So that does make this to be a extremely versatile lens when it comes to photography and for video. Now, you probably noticed that it's not white. So similar to the 70 to 200 here, I've put one of those acrylic coatings over it to help to protect the lens. Now, this is the lens that's traveled with me to a number of places. I've been to Africa a couple of times with it. I've taken it to Sri Lanka on safari. It's been to the Middle East on several occasions in its short life that it's had. I've only had it for 3 years. And there's barely a scratch on it, and there's barely a mark on it. And inside the lens barrel, I've not noticed any significant amount of dust or sand or anything that may have managed to get in. And it's been through some pretty extreme conditions, I can tell you that. So all in all, yeah, it's been a pretty fantastic lens. It's also relatively small and compact compared to other lenses in this kind of focal range. When I compare it to, say, some of the Sigma or the Tamron 150 to 600, or maybe the Sony 200 to 600, these are all kind of very similar sort of lenses in terms of the focal range and the aperture. This does seem to be a lot smaller and a lot more compact and a lot lighter than those lenses, which I think is a bit of a winner for Canon there. Unfortunately, there are some minor caveats with this lens. I mean, you can use teleconverters, for example, but you can only attach a teleconverter when it's been extended out to sort of 300 millimeters, which is about there. Yeah, I'm not really sure why Canon did that. I think it has to be a design flaw of some sort. It does make it a little bit awkward to use if you want to use teleconverters. There is also the new RF 200 to 800 lens that's just been released, and I think that's 6.3 to f9. So if you're not shooting kind of professional sports or wildlife, or you don't need that kind of L series quality, probably going to be a better alternative, perhaps, especially if you're going on safari. But it's all a compromise, really. I mean, for me, this has been a really, really good lens so far, and I'm kind of pleased I bought it, really. Okay, so now we get to the big guns. These lenses are outrageous, but to be honest, they don't get any better than this. This is a 400mm f2.8 lens. So it's basically a fixed focal length lens. So I'm fixed at 400mm. So you have to be really selective when it comes to your subject when you go to get this out of its case, because there are a lot of limitations. It's also insanely expensive at around sort of 12,000 US dollars, I think the latest price is. You might be able to get one for like 9 to 10,000 in a used condition. That's the RF version, but you've also got the old EF versions that can be used with an adapter. I mean, this is basically the EF Mark III version with the adapter built in, but you can get the EF version, say the Mark I or the Mark II, much cheaper. You might be able to find a Mark I and just get the EF to RF adapter, and you might be able to pick one of those up for maybe 3,000-4,000 US dollars now, but they're going to be pretty beaten up. These lenses are probably 25, 30 years old now. They've been around a long time, and it really shows as well. So, but as you can see, I've kind of bought this neoprene kind of covering, and you can see it's pretty dirty already. It gives you an idea of what these lenses go through out in the field. They put through quite a lot, I've got to be honest. I mean, they do take a lot of damage. So I've kind of protected mine because it's kind of a brand new lens. So I wanted to put this neoprene cover on, and you can see that it's really beginning to get quite tatty. Kind of pleased I did it because I didn't want a brand new lens to get damaged straight away. Really doing everything I can to look after this lens. Now, if you're looking to get one of the EF versions, and no reason why you shouldn't get one, really, you don't have to get the RF version. They're going to work just as well, I think, on the R series cameras. Now, you really need to do like a physical check of the lens if you're thinking about getting one of these. Do not buy them online from eBay or anything like that, because the EF Mark I, for example, is probably like 20, 25 years old already. So they've probably been through a lot, and they've taken a lot of damage and a lot of scrapes, and they've been banged around. They're probably okay optically. Optically, probably fine, but you need to check it physically. You need to do a proper eye examination of the lens before you buy them. It's still a pretty significant investment. I mean, that is way more than any of these lenses here. To spend, 4,000 or 5,000 on a lens that's like already 20 years old is pretty amazing. That's still a lot of money to invest. So really be careful when you consider buying an old EF version of this lens. This is the lens I use for professional sports. It produces ultra sharp, clean and bright images in the most extreme conditions because of the f2.8 aperture. This lens is not cheap, as I mentioned, but if you want to be amongst the best photographers, then f2.8 at 400mm is where you need to be. It can be used with teleconverters. So a 1.4 times converter is going to give you a focal distance of 560mm at f4. Still pretty amazing, I've got to be honest. F4 at 560mm. That's the difference you're going to get with this lens. Because it's a fixed focal length, there are a lot of occasions where I'm having to crop in on my subject because I can't zoom in and out. And of course, if your subject gets too close to you, then I have to switch cameras. So I have to switch, and I'll probably switch to the 70 to 200. So that's kind of how I would work. I would have this on one camera and I would have the 70 to 200 on another camera. When my subject just gets too close for 400mm, then I switch to 70 to 200. But if my subject is quite a long distance away, then I will have to crop in. And that's where you're obviously reducing the amount of pixels in your photos. But that is basically the compromise that you have to make for the image quality that you're going to get. For me, it's a compromise worth making, I have to say. And of course, the size and weight is not ideal for travel. It's not a travel-friendly lens as opposed to, say, the 100 to 500 or these smaller lenses here. So you have to bear that in mind. It's not an easy lens to travel with. You're going to have to expect to make some serious compromises when you have a lens like this. It's kind of like buying a brand new car. You're going to have to think about things like insurance. You're going to have to think about maintenance. You're going to have to think about storage, where you're going to keep it, you're keeping it safe, keeping it dry, keeping it moisture free, all those things. So you're going to have to buy proper storage container for it. That's what I have. I have one of those kind of Pelican cases that's just packed full of silicone gel. And every time I finish using it, it goes straight back into that case. And so I'm keeping the lens safe and dry and kind of moisture free. It's a serious commitment. It's a big financial commitment to make. Like I said, you could buy a car with this lens. This lens here is literally a vehicle with an engine and 4 wheels and 4 seats and whatever. It's extremely high maintenance, but it's also a very, very long-term investment. Like I said earlier, there's the EF version that's 20 to 30 years old, the Mark I. Those lenses are still available on the market and people are still spending sort of upwards of say $4,000 or $5,000 on those lenses. They do hold their money. It is a long-term investment. I think it's worth it when you compare your photos with other people with what I would consider to be kind of inferior quality gear, equipment. You're going to notice a big difference. 400mm at f2.8 aperture produces the most incredible kind of magical looking photos. So these are the main lenses that I use on the R series Canon cameras. Thanks again. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more videos.